All right, welcome back. This is the Something Venture podcast. I am Kent Lindstrom. I am your host. My guest today is Domm Holland. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, Ken.
Yeah.
Thanks for asking. Thanks for having me, and thanks to Harry for introducing us, Harry
I
Stebbings.
I absolutely appreciate it from Harry. By the way, with a name like Domm Holland, why did you come to Silicon Valley? You should be in Hollywood. That is a
Yeah, and well, I'll tell you what. My our family name is before I was born is Berkelmans, and my father was you can tell from my funny accent I am Australian, and my father was a young Dutch actor in Australia, and he
Yeah.
didn't want to have a Dutch name, try to break into acting in Australia, so he changed his name, but he changed it to Holland.
That's
So
great.
there you
It's
go.
such a great Hollywood tradition. Dom is in Silicon Valley. He is the founder and CEO of Fast, which is the world's fastest login and checkout company, a company that's aiming to get to billions and billions of people, have raised over $20 million from the likes of Kleiner Perkins, Index, and Stripe. But you did not start out here in Silicon Valley. You were in Australia. And this was not your first company. You had something else you'd done first, right? Was this a towing company?
Yeah, so prior to Fast, my last venture was a on-demand towing platform called tow.com.au in Australia. Founded that in July 2014, and there was quite a large venture, grew really fast, one of the fastest growing startups in the country for a long time. And I think we did $50 million in revenue in 4 years. It was bootstrapped, actually. I didn't raise any money beyond the sort of initial cash injections. So it was an interesting venture, and very different company with heavy logistics and physical resource than Fast and this business, which is a lot more lightweight in many respects.
How
But
the hell did you get into the towing business? Isn't that like a kind of a violent business, like kind of a tough business, like the waste management business?
it is a really tough industry, but it's also like really low tech, which is which was appeal for me.
Yeah.
I think, I've worked in a lot of different industries and sectors. Always think that my job never changes no matter what the venture is or the product. Like my approach to solving problems, the way that, I build businesses and run teams, I always have the exact same approach. And so it doesn't really matter what the product is, more my approach to solving it. And so different problems just are more interesting to me, the more different the issues. So, yeah, I don't think I've got a sort of industry niche or specialty. I just like my approach to solving problems.
And how did you move from such a kind of real world, intense, asset heavy thing to something where you're trying to be actually an incredibly lightweight way to interact with websites on the internet?
Yeah, so I think this is the most appropriate product solution to the problem. And in my last business, which was asset heavy, we ran the largest, car holding yards in the country. That along with a lot of tech as well was the most appropriate sort of product solution. And so, I think that's all it comes down to. I really, I love the sort of pure play tech solution that we have, and really the problem is so large for what we're solving here that the solution needs to be highly scalable as well, and no physical solution could scale to billions of people,
Right.
and so it's a pure technological one.
And how did you find it? You're in Brisbane, Australia, is that right? Where you're located?
Correct. Yes.
And
Yeah.
did you sit down and start coding, or did you meet a guy who had already built this thing, or how did this all start?
Sure. So I'm married with two little kids, and my youngest child was in hospital for 3 weeks.
Uh,
And we had my wife's grandmother staying with us and helping us out at the time. And one night, my wife was up at the hospital, and I was at home with her granny, and Granny was ordering groceries for us, so we'd have food in the house. She forgot a password and just couldn't order groceries. And it was just preposterous to see this little old lady sitting there with a purse out, innocent and sweet, and just, a company that turns over $70 billion a year who couldn't figure out how to take money from her
Right.
without some arbitrary string of text that she just couldn't remember, that had nothing to do with her identity, had nothing to do with the transaction, and was just a pure blocker to commerce. And I just remember thinking it was, obviously it was a high stress time in our lives, and I just remember thinking it was crazy. And so I spent 48 hours. I built a prototype of passwordless authentication with basically magic links as a service. I put it on Product Hunt, and we had tens of thousands of people use it. Within sort of a couple of days, I realized the world was mad, and there was really a really big problem here to be solved.
So off to the races right from the beginning, really.
Yeah,
Like a very relatively quick start.
yeah, I say I knew immediately, and I'm sure that other people thought I was mad for a long time, and they probably still do. But I knew immediately that there was that this was going to be a large scale network. That the reality was that this problem is faced by every single internet connected consumer in the world. And
Right.
the problem isn't passwords. The problem is that we reduplicate a consumer over and over again for every single organization, and that
Right.
doesn't make sense. It doesn't scale. We can't remember 500 passwords. We can't continually fill in the same information over and over. I'm nearly 33. My date of birth hasn't changed in 33 years, and yet I have to continue to fill it out as if it's brand new information for every company. And in Australia, we write date first, then month, then year. In America, you write month first, then date, then year. So I'm constantly like restructuring my data for businesses over and over. It just doesn't make sense, and it doesn't scale. When I move address, I have to tell everyone what my new address is, and change my mail, change my bank, change telco. That there isn't a world in 10 years where we're still doing this,
Right.
and we shouldn't be. And so I knew that this problem is so incredibly large, so incredibly pressing, and it just needed to be solved.
Yeah. So as you see this, you're like, I am onto something. I'm going to go change the world. Why don't you make your way to Sydney and raise money from the Australian venture capital firms, or however that works? What's the ecosystem there that was available to you?
Yeah, look, we've got startup ecosystems. Even in Queensland, there are strong startup ecosystems growing and established. And we've got sizable tech companies in Australia. Some great examples, well known like Atlassian or Canva. Some more recent fintech examples like Afterpay and Zip and QuadPay. So it's not that we don't have them. The reality is that none of these companies have ever had to achieve network scale size from a consumer perspective. They can make lots of money. It's not that they're not valued highly, but they never have to achieve that level of scale. And Australia is a country with 25 million people. We simply haven't had to scale to that size ever. Like our biggest, application is the census, and it happens once a year, and that fails. And so to solve this problem for billions of people, we needed engineers to be building our solutions to be able to scale to that number of people. And there's one city in the world that has the highest density of engineers that have worked at that scale, and that's San Francisco. So I always knew that the business would be based here and that our sort of core engineering team would be.
And how did you connect to San Francisco? I mean, you're off running a towing company in Brisbane, and how the hell do you find your way across the ocean and find your way into this network?
Fear is the biggest blocker to anything, and I lack a lot of fear. And so it was easy, to be frank. And I don't mean to put that sort of lightly, but it's a lot easier than I think people think. And I think the fear is the biggest blocker. And so I caught a plane over here, and I just sort of started meeting people and started networking. And it's really easy. We've got tools like Twitter and LinkedIn and we can make introductions, and it's easy when you just go around saying, hey, I'm an Aussie founder. I'd love to tell you about what we're doing, because it's kind of interesting. You just find your edge, and people are typically interested in the mad Aussie guy for at least 5 minutes, right? And then if you can capitalize on the 5 minutes, then you can get another 5. And so, that's what I did. I, pounded the pavement and met a lot of people and built networks and went from there.
Yeah, I think that's a unique thing about Silicon Valley. I think people here are just excited to meet somebody new. Unlike many other industries, if you went to Hollywood and said, hey, I want to be an actor, or you went to New York and said, I want to get into finance, it would be a long time before you got a meeting. But in Silicon Valley, people just have that attitude of like, this might be the guy. Like, this might be the guy that I meet him and I invest, and we're working on $1 billion company together.
So it's such a collaborative place. I
mean, it's There is magic to it, and I'll ask you about that in a second. But how then was there a break? Was there one meeting where the guy pulled out the checkbook and said, "I'm in," or what? How did it all begin for you in Silicon Valley, like the funding part of it?
Yeah, I suppose so. I met on Twitter a lady named Alison Barr Allen, who was working at Uber. She was a head of global product operations for Uber and their money team. Uber's got an incredibly large financial services division. It's a sort of core tenet of their business now. It's a highly relevant field. She was an angel investor. So whilst I wasn't raising money, I just raised a sort of friends and family round in Australia. I knew that she'd have a higher propensity for startups, and I reached out. We caught up for a coffee, I think a few days later, and told her about what I was building, and it aligned like perfectly with a thesis that she had written a couple of years ago for frictionless finance. And we have like very similar views of the world in terms of identity and payments. And so we got along really well. She wanted to introduce me to the investor that that is in many eyes, especially hers, is ranked as the number one fintech investor in the world, who's Jan Hammer of Index Ventures, and he's based in London. And anyway, so she connected me with him. He was in America last year on Labor Day, and so we caught up for breakfast. This was about a week later. And I told him about what I was doing, and he made me a spot on the offer to invest. And Index led our pre-seed round. We raised a $2.5 million pre-seed round. So I went back to Alison and I said, Index is in. I said, are you? And she said, sure. I already told you that I would invest in the company. And I said, no. Are you going to come and help build the company? Wow. And so, I think that the two exchanges were she both introduced me to Jan, and I think he was the first big check into the business, and definitely helped catapult. And obviously, Alison and I are now co-founders in the venture and are building the company together.
So you met your co-founder on Twitter, essentially.
Yeah. And I wasn't out looking for a co-founder. I was just out looking for, looking for connections and network and building networks. And so it was worked out.
And why do you think Twitter, not LinkedIn, would seem like a more obvious thing? I mean, is Twitter your power channel there? Or?
Yeah, look, our whole org now is actually, most of our organization has been built on Twitter, really. We've met so many team members, obviously co-founders, investors, partners, clients, huge networks that we built from Twitter. It's really an amazing channel. I don't think that's necessarily true of every sector and every geography, but absolutely of San Francisco tech. Twitter is a fantastic channel. San Francisco startup or D2C and e-commerce. It is truly a fantastic channel. It's highly engaged, and you can connect directly with lots of interesting people. You can communicate with them openly and freely, and it's a very efficient form of communication. So yeah, it's done amazing things for our business, and it's been an incredible channel to sort of for us to build ourselves on.
Well, now, so the company starts scaling, you start hiring. You've done a couple of rounds since then, right? With Kleiner Perkins, and Stripe came in at some point. Stripe, obviously, the huge payments company.
Yeah, so Kleiner invested in the round that pre-seed led. They made a small investment in that round. And then we raised, 4 months later, we raised a $20 million Series A that was led by Stripe. Yeah. So, and Index Ventures and Sousa also invested in our pre-seed, and they co-invested in our Series A as well.
So you're building up a team. You're all in the office. Everything's going great. Nothing could go wrong, except then there's a global pandemic, and everybody has to go home. And now you're a CEO running a startup in I hate to say unprecedented one more time, but in a pretty unusual time. How did this kind of wash over your company, and how have you kind of dealt with leading the company through this?
Yeah, look, obviously the number one thing about COVID is like the safety of people. And, we've had close friends and and relatives of the Fast family who have been affected by COVID, and it's an incredibly awful and tragic sort of circumstance, and that really is the number one thing that is at play in terms of the way it affects our business. We, the second we went into lockdown, we decided that we would open up all of our hiring roles to remote as well. And I think it was one of the best decisions we made. We made it very quickly. And I think at least half of the people that we've, onboarded since the start of COVID, so the last sort of 3 months or so now, are remote and are working in other places. And there was just no competitive advantage for us to limit the people who were physically based around us. Once we knew that we wouldn't be working from the office for some time, so we capitalized from that standpoint quite quickly and quite early and well. In terms of managing them, any decent tech company these days should find it relatively easily to run staff remotely. I mean, tech is we have all of the tools, all productivity tools, communication tools to run teams remotely. Keeping communication is really important, and we do that well. We do daily stand-ups. I do a daily stand-up with every single function in the business. It's a really good way for everyone to keep aligned. I don't like to say it's, to be capitalizing on what is like a really tough circumstance for a lot of people. But commercially, our business, can sort of thrive through this environment. COVID has forced billions of people to shelter in place and buy groceries at home.
Right.
Our company was literally incepted from the point of watching grannies unable to buy groceries. And now there's more grannies than ever having to buy groceries for the first time online. So we're set up to solve problems that more people than ever before are having. On top of that, the actual e-commerce market has, it was $4 trillion the last 12 months. It's probably like 5 or 6, over this 12-month period now with COVID. So that's a big piece. There's never been more talent available on the market and than now, and at a time when everyone's laying people off, we're actively hiring. And so uniquely, there's a lot of people on the market. So yeah, it's a really interesting time. Yeah.
And when you say you hire remotely, is it really anywhere in the world? Like I can be in Chile or Nairobi, or is it you kind of cluster in certain other, maybe say India or Estonia?
No, we've got someone in Switzerland, someone in France, someone in Malaysia. We don't have any sort of geographical boundaries. It becomes more difficult purely from a time zone perspective.
Right.
And so ideally we can find time zones that are more conducive to the majority of the team that's working out of SF.
Yep.
But it's not a hard blocker. And we do like Malaysia is a tough time zone for us to sort of reconcile with at the moment. But yeah, there's great people all around the world.
It's interesting. I had a company that had offices all over, including like Singapore, Dublin, and you'd kind of get these meetings, and it was an interesting dynamic because you'd have some people who had just come into the office at 7 a.m., so they had their coffee and they're ready to go and kind of had time to chat, and they're just kind of getting their day going. And then people like 7 o'clock at night were kind of done. It was fine. Like they're there for the meeting, but they'd been there all day and they're kind of ready to get home. And it was kind of interesting to see those different sort of dynamics around the planet kind of come together in a meeting.
Yeah, well, I tell you, the last company, Tow, it was a 24-hour business. So towing is a 24-hour business. We had government contracts, across the country, and so we had a 24-hour call center. We had drivers working 24 hours across the country, and I loved having a 24-hour business. I mean, It also can be tiring because we could get alerts in the middle of the night. There was a break-in at a holding yard and cars had been stolen or something like that. But I also love just having a continuous operation. And I think that there's something to that is like a constant progress being made. It's like, it may be a philosophical thing, but it's nice to see like continuous progress in a business. And so I think that's a nice quality that sort of remote companies have as well, is this sort of continuity.
And as or if people come back to the office, I mean, is there any sense that this is working because you guys were together in the office and now you're using up that social capital to hold things together? Or do you think just the pure remote thing would work just fine if there wasn't a core, in San
Yeah.
Francisco in one office?
Yeah, it's obviously like this is such a divisive topic. So I like to work from an office. It's something I like. I can work from home, sort of. And in fact, I've gone long periods of time working from home. I just prefer to work from an office, and I prefer to sort of have people around. Now, the way I look at remote work versus office work, and the way that I think our company will continue to operate, is that uh, I think of it as the same thing as dieting. Everyone has different bodies, right? So one diet works for one person and it doesn't work for the next person because they've just got different body, body genetics, genetics and body makeups. And I think the same is true for people. Some people like to work from an office and some people like to work remotely. And the companies who can cater to both are poised to do very well. Because someone who is an extrovert and hates being alone will hate working from home. Like that's
Yeah.
just the way they're just wired to want to be physically around other people. And the people who hate it, who are stark introverts and hate being around other people, love working remote. So this sort of idea that everyone needs to fall into like a bucket that that a company will fall. Everyone within one company will fall within a bucket, I think is setting themselves up for failure. And so I think we'll continue to offer both. And some days, some people's kids aren't well and they need to stay home, and suddenly remote becomes a great opportunity for that person for the day. And I think that's a really important point.
So, what do you make of the future of? I mean, in some sense, the future is becoming. It's a weird thing to say, but more clear. Like now we know that there was going to be a pandemic that we didn't know about in January. So we know the world is going to be a lot more. Look, nobody knows anything, but a lot more e-commerce, a lot more people logging into things, a lot more people working remotely. As you look at the sort of battlefield that you're in, what do you think the challenges are, and what are the things that excite you? Like, what are you really going to change about the world at the end of the day?
Yeah, so I think some of the like societal challenges that we're going to face, like irrespective of fast, commercial real estate. I think there's going to be huge issues around commercial real estate. I do think that residential real estate will change is that as remote work does become more popular, like how does that change the makeup of where people live around sort of large cities and smaller cities, not just here but all around the world. I know Australia is, we look at similar things. um, and home offices, and it'll just, I think property has a lot of ramifications, but I do think commercial property, any sort of commercial retail that was available is not going to be filled anytime soon. The stuff that has been taken, there's a lot of companies which are going to go under. As there's more remote work, there's less office space needed, so there's just a lot of challenges there. For us specifically, and in terms of what we're going to do, there's now just like, for us, it's just a larger market. There's just more people for us to help, for us to remove friction from their sort of digital lives. So we make it easier for you to log in, easier for you to register, easier for you to share data, easier for you to make payments. And so we can do that at a larger scale, and at a faster, with a sort of broader footprint, and with faster adoption cycles, because enterprise that, e-commerce, large enterprise, especially here, we've got companies who turn over tens of billions of dollars, and previously e-commerce might have been 10% of that, right? And so it's a significant amount of money to most people. It's, for them, it's a small piece of their business. E-commerce now is upwards of 25% of their business. Suddenly it's it's an absolute core part of their business. If they lost 25% of their business, that's a very significant slide in stock price.
Yeah.
And it can continue to grow. So for those companies which previously e-commerce wasn't a sort of primary driver, suddenly they need to really rethink their e-commerce strategy. How do they make it easier for people to buy from them if they're typically coming from the worst online experiences? And so they're going to be beaten every day of the week by people with better online experiences. So, I think enterprise are going to be very fast. And we're seeing this already. They're going to be very fast adopters of fast. And so I think there's a lot of work for us to do.
Well, let me finish with it. Well, a couple of things. When do you think you'll get back to Australia, by the way?
So my wife and kids are actually in Australia. They left a few weeks ago, and to sort of ride out COVID there. Well, they're having the time of their life at the beach and beautiful weather, and and now that we're seeing riots and looting is I think they're going to be there for another at least probably 6 weeks or so, and so it's a hard time for us being apart. But Australia has a 14-day quarantine period, so I can't even duck off for a few days to go and visit. Otherwise, I would. So we're kind of stuck. So I don't know. I would like to think that maybe Christmas time I'll get back to Australia, but we'll see.
And let me finish with this. What are you optimistic about at this point? I mean, your company seems to be thriving. You've figured it out. You've got an empty office, but you've got people around the world working. What really, aside from the horrible things that are going on, what really excites you about the future?
Yeah, I'm optimistic about everything, and I'm not a sort of over dramatized optimist, but I think like the protests that are happening at the moment. I think that there are some sort of societal injustices that need to be rectified, and I would like to think that now's a perfect time for us to sort of start to address them and to fix some wounds that are obviously out there. And I'm confident that this is a good step towards that. It's just a bit of a sort of hard road to get there. But everything, anything meaningful takes hard work. And so the same thing for us. I think, COVID is going to ensure that the world tightens up its pandemic policies and make sure that we have masks stockpiled, and it's going to cause a lot of solid ramifications, and a lot of good things will come of it around the world. I do think that there's going to be more economic pain as a result, and it's just something we're going to have to brace for. But I tell you what, that's going to bring out a whole wave of new businesses and new innovation that will address that. So I'm quite optimistic across the board. I think that it's like my approach to anything is just I'm kind of ready for any situation, not because I've got all the answers, but I know how to get the answers, and we've got a team of people who know how to get the answers. And I think that the world is, we're set up to do good things. Everyone needs to try and look after themselves, mentally and physically, and sort of get through, a bit of a tough time.
Oh, that's a great thought. So how do people follow you, get in touch with you, learn about you? Twitter, I guess, might be one way to do it.
Yeah, Twitter's a great channel, at Domm, Domm for Mary. Right. Pardon my funny accent. And it's that's the best channel. They can follow me on Instagram, but they're going to see a lot more photos of my wife and kids, and and pretty beaches and stuff like that.
It'll make them jealous of Australia, being in Australia.
Yeah.
All right. Exactly. Well, thanks so much for doing this.
All right, thanks for having me.
I appreciate it. Domm Holland's been my guest. This is the Something About Your podcast. Talk to you next time.